There is a ritual of sorts that goes on in Florida every year when folks get wind of the news that a big storm is brewing. Windows are boarded, boats are dry docked, and grocery stores and home improvement stores are picked clean of anything that might come in handy in the unlikely event that a massive hurricane hits. What keeps people going through the annual routine of following spaghetti models and prepping for the big one in the Sunshine State and other coastal areas is that so many have seen a hurricane or two, and they know the kind of serious destruction these storms can cause. From an 18th century hurricane that ravaged the Caribbean to the devastating blow issued by Sandy in 2012, history is replete with stories of the wreckage and ruin that come with a major storm. By definition, a hurricane is a tropical storm with winds above 74 miles per hour, or 119 kilometers per hour. The systems occur all over the world. In the Western Atlantic and Eastern Pacific Oceans, they are called hurricanes. In the Indian Ocean and South Pacific, they are called cyclones, and in the Western Pacific, they are called typhoons. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we will tell you about the top 7 deadliest hurricanes ever. But before, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more similar content. Let's dive in. 7. Gilbert. There are many ways to measure a hurricane, whether wind speed and rain or lives lost and property damage caused. Then there's sheer size with a 500 nautical mile or 926 kilometer diameter. Gilbert was one of the largest hurricanes ever observed in the Atlantic Basin. The storm originated near the Cape Verde Islands and the west coast of Africa, the birthplace of some of the worst hurricanes in history. After becoming a Category 5 storm in September 1988, Gilbert literally covered the entire island of Jamaica, damaging roughly 80% of the island's homes. The hurricane then moved on to the Cayman Islands and Mexico, among other areas, before weakening and crossing into Texas, manifesting itself in a series of tornadoes. The storm caused 318 deaths, including 200 people killed in flooding in Mexico, and 28 who died when a Cuban freight ship was thrown into a shrimp boat. Gilbert-related damages topped out at about $5.5 billion. 6. 1935 Florida Keys Labor Day Hurricane. This Category 5 storm, considered the strongest to hit the U.S. in the 20th century, brought 200 mile per hour or 320 kilometers per hour winds and soaking rain to the upper and middle Florida Keys, and killed approximately 400 people. More than half of the dead were World War I veterans who had been working on building a highway from Key West to Key Largo. Damage in the United States was estimated at $6 million. This storm is simply known as the Labor Day Hurricane because the practice of naming hurricanes didn't begin until 1953, and the World Meteorological Organization gave storms only female handles until 1978. The storm also struck well before advances in weather tracking technology, including the regular use of Doppler radar that predict where a storm might end up, leaving residents largely in the dark as the hurricane approached. Many of the victims had waited anxiously for an evacuation train that never came. It was washed away from the tracks. 5. Katrina. Hurricane Katrina is often referred to as a man-made rather than natural disaster by those who fault infrastructure problems for the decimation caused by the storm that ravaged New Orleans and other parts of the Gulf Coast. On August 26, 2005, Hurricane Katrina looked like a hurricane that was fizzling out, but it began rapidly strengthening to Category 5 levels over warm water in the Gulf of Mexico. By August 28, a mandatory evacuation order was issued for New Orleans. As the Category 3 hurricane reached the city, water topped over its systems of levees, causing them to break and the streets to flood. Eventually, 80% of New Orleans was underwater. Katrina left residents who couldn't or chose not to evacuate, stranded in their homes with waters rising around them. 40% of hurricane-related deaths were from drowning. Slow federal government reaction to the plight of those affected led to claims of incompetence and even deliberate disregard for poor and black people. In all, Hurricane Katrina claimed 1,833 lives at $161 billion and is considered the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. The Federal Emergency Management Agency called it the single most catastrophic natural disaster in U.S. history. Hurricane Katrina also displaced 400,000 people to areas like Houston and Atlanta. Many never returned. An upgraded system of levees was completed in 2013, but officials are worried about the massive cost of maintaining them with a shrunken tax base. 4. Maria. Hurricane Maria was the second Category 5 hurricane of the 2017 season. Coming just 2 weeks after a brutal Irma, Maria was particularly devastating as it passed through some of the same areas Irma traveled. Maria reached landfall on the tiny island of Dominica on September 18, 2017. With wind speeds of 117 miles per hour or 281 kilometers per hour, it then moved on to Guadalupe and the U.S. Virgin Islands before destroying the island of Puerto Rico on September 20. By then, it had weakened to a Category 4 with winds of 155 miles per hour or 250 kilometers per hour, dumping 10 inches or 25 centimeters of rain. The official death toll from Maria was put at 146, 64 in Puerto Rico, 65 in Dominica, and the rest in other islands. However, people believed the real total was much higher. The Puerto Rican government finally revised the death toll to 2,975 in August 2018, almost a year after the disaster, after commissioning an independent investigation from George Washington University. Source: Fink. In addition, the damage costs were estimated to be at least $1.31 billion for Dominica and over $90 billion for Puerto Rico. Maria was the deadliest storm to hit Puerto Rico and the third costliest storm to hit the U.S. after Katrina and Harvey. At one point, 90% of Puerto Rico was without electricity, thanks to all the downed utility poles. Even several years later, the island has still not completely recovered, and thousands of residents have moved to the U.S. mainland for good. 3. Galveston Hurricane of 1900. Hurricanes Katrina and Michael were both terrible, but neither were the worst storms to hit the Gulf Coast. The Galveston Hurricane of 1900 killed an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people, mostly in Texas in September 1900. And is considered the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history. The storm didn't become a hurricane until passing west of the Florida Keys, where a sharp left turn sent it heading straight toward Galveston. That gave residents and local officials less than 4 days to prepare. The Category 4 storm brought 20-foot or 6-meter storm surges and flash flooding to the region, and even pounded Oklahoma and Kansas when it was done with Texas. More than 3,600 homes, as well as a number of structures believed to be storm-proof, were destroyed in the hurricane, whose damage totaled $30 million. Galveston took some amazing steps to ensure the damage was not repeated. It built a 3.5-mile or 5-kilometer seawall, later extended to 10 miles or 16 kilometers, and raised the level of the entire city, in some places as much as 16 feet or 5 meters. 2. Mitch. Hurricane Mitch might not have received as much attention as other storms in the U.S., but the death and devastation this hurricane caused exceeded some of the history's better-known storms. The slow-moving hurricane seemingly paused once it reached Honduras in October 1998, dumping up to 4 inches or 10 centimeters of rain an hour for 2 days, causing mudslides and deadly flooding along the way. With approximately 11,000 people dead and thousands more missing, Mitch is the second deadliest hurricane on record and the worst to hit the Western Hemisphere in more than 200 years. The storm caused more than $5 billion in damages in Honduras, where much of the country's infrastructures and crops were completely destroyed. Nicaragua was also devastated by Mitch, losing 2,000 people in one mudslide alone. 1. The Great Hurricane of 1780. The U.S. as we know it is just a gleam in George Washington's eyes when the Great Hurricane of 1780 blasted its way through the Caribbean, killing approximately 22,000 people. Among the dead were British and American soldiers who had been skirmishing in warships scattered throughout the region as part of the Revolutionary War. While there isn't much data on record regarding the hurricane's speed or rainfall, what we do know is that the storm bombarded several Caribbean islands, including Barbados, Martinique, and St. Lucia over 6 days in October. One local observer wrote that the hurricane stripped bark off of trees, which has caused some to speculate the wind speeds must have topped 200 miles per hour, or 320 kilometers per hour. This massive storm is considered the deadliest hurricane of all time. That was all from us today, folks. For more similar content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.